Katana, the soul of the samurai, is an inseparable part of the history of the samurai. Within the array of swords used as primary weapons by the samurai, there are actually two major types: the Uchigatana and the Tachi, or long sword. Broadly speaking, what you might imagine as a sword a samurai wears at his waist is called an Uchigatana. On the other hand, a sword with a longer blade and generally larger construction is characteristic of the Tachi. In this episode, we will delve into the advent of the Tachi in Japanese history, its evolution, and the detailed differences between the Uchigatana and Tachi. The history of swords in Japan is ancient, dating back to before the Common Era, when straight swords, introduced from China, were already in use. For a while, straight swords were prevalent, but during the Heian period, as samurai, who primarily engaged in mounted combat, began to rise in prominence, there was a demand for swords that were easier to draw on horseback and allowed for fluid defense. This led to the creation of the Tachi, a sword with a curvature. While the straight swords used previously were mainly for stabbing, the curvature at the base of the blade enhanced the sharpness of slashes. The curve of the blade offered various advantages in actual combat, such as easily drawing the blade from the scabbard, smoothing the action of cutting and pulling for severance, and absorbing the impact when striking. Additionally, compared to the traditional straight swords, the blade length increased significantly to about 30 to 31 inches, which was sufficient for a mounted warrior to slash and cut down an opponent from horseback. This marked the beginning of the Tachi, and by extension, the Katana. Although the Tachi, with its longer blade, is often seen as a separate entity from the standard sword, the Uchigatana that is commonly known today as the Katana actually came later. The original Katana was the Tachi. The Kamakura period marked a significant evolution for the Tachi. During this era, power shifted from the emperor to the warrior class, and the nation was embroiled in extensive conflicts. This led to the mass production and evolution of the katana. Currently, over 100 katanas are designated as national treasures, with 80% of them dating back to the Kamakura period, and 70% of those being Tachi. As conflicts increased, the Tachi evolved from the elegant design characteristic of the Heian period to a more robust and grandiose form that matched the spirit of the warriors at the time. Specifically, the blades became wider and thicker, and the tips took on a shorter, more compact shape. To cut through heavy armor, the swords increased in weight and size. Thus, the battles between warriors brought about the first major evolution of the Tachi. Further evolution of the Tachi occurred in the mid-Kamakura period, triggered by the Mongolian invasions of Japan, known as the Genko. This revealed three significant flaws in the Tachi. First, the thickness of the blade made it heavy and difficult to wield. Second, traditional Tachi were prone to chipping and breaking after repeated clashes. Third, the short tip made it impossible to repair blade damage, rendering the Tachi useless. At the time, Japan primarily engaged in one-on-one mounted combat, for which the traditional Tachi shape was effective. However, it proved inadequate against the Mongol army's infantry tactics, exposing several weaknesses. To address these flaws and prepare for future foreign invasions, Japan was compelled to reform its swordsmithing techniques. The renowned swordsmith Masamune then perfected a new style of tachi. This new tachi combined soft and hard steel to enhance strength, narrowed the blade to reduce weight, and extended the tip, allowing for repairs if chipped and making it better suited for thrusting, similar to Western swords. Thus, during the Kamakura period, the tachi evolved significantly and was perfected as a peerless sword. Subsequently, the tachi continued to be used throughout the era of mounted combat during the Nambokucho period. As warfare shifted to infantry combat, the leading role among swords transitioned to the shorter and more manageable Uchigatana. By the Sengoku period, with the rise of the Uchigatana, the tachi was seldom used in battle, becoming more a symbol of authority among high-ranking warriors. Thus, the tachi evolved its role over time. So what are the clear differences between the Uchigatana, the Japanese sword we are familiar with, and the tachi? The first noticeable difference is their length. There is a relative difference in length between the tachi and the Uchigatana. Traditionally, tachi were made longer than Uchigatana, which were somewhat shorter. The Uchigatana was originally developed for easier handling compared to the tachi, so the difference in length is to be expected. However, by modern classification standards, both tachi and swords with blade lengths of about 24 inches or more are included, making length alone an unclear differentiator. This is also influenced by the fact that many existing Japanese swords have been shortened over time through successive generations for easier handling. Another difference is in the curvature of the blade. The tachi is characterized by a deep curve regardless of blade length, typically with the center of the curve closer to the hilt. On the other hand, the Uchigatana features a shallower curve compared to the tachi. This was to allow for quicker drawing of the blade from the scabbard during foot battles. The most significant difference between the tachi and the Uchigatana is how they are worn. The tachi is suspended from the waist using a cord made of leather or similar material. In contrast, the Uchigatana is worn by inserting the scabbard into the belt at the waist. The image of a samurai that people today commonly imagine involves the sword being worn at the waist. Thus, such a samurai would be carrying an Uchigatana. Moreover, as the tachi is suspended from the waist, the blade always faces downward while being worn. On the other hand, the Uchigatana was worn with the blade facing up, inserted into the waistband. This difference arises from the distinct ways each sword is drawn. Following this, swords are displayed in museums and art galleries with the blade facing down. Incidentally, samurai wore both tachi and Uchigatana on the left side because the right hand was used to draw the sword. Samurai were typically right-handed by convention, and those born left-handed were often retrained to use their right hand. Interestingly, there are several types of tachi beyond the common variety. First is the kodachi, which refers to tachi with a blade length of less than 23.6 inches. Due to its size, it's often mistaken for a wakizashi, the samurai's secondary sword. It's said that kodachi were not used in actual combat, but rather served mostly for ceremonial purposes. A renowned user of the kodachi was Toda Seigen, a swordsman from the Sengoku period known as a blind sword master. In a tournament held in what is now Gifu Prefecture, despite his blindness, he famously defeated an opponent armed with a wooden sword, using a short split stick in just 3 moves. The O-Tachi refers to a large tachi with a blade length exceeding 35.4 inches. While primarily dedicated to shrines, it is also said to have been used on battlefields as a weapon for mounted warriors. To lighten their weight, many O-Tachi had thinner cross-sections and grooves carved into the blade. Ownership of O-Tachi was limited to those of high status, and when used on the battlefield, a retainer would carry the O-Tachi. The method of drawing an O-Tachi involved either having a retainer hold the scabbard while the owner drew the sword, or the retainer drawing the sword from the scabbard to hand it over. And then there's the Uchigatana Tachi, a sword considered a precursor to the tachi, used by military officials during the Heian period. It's a unique type among Japanese swords, not following the common construction of fitting the blade into a wooden handle. Instead, both the blade and the handle are made of iron, forming a single integrated structure. The blade has an extreme waist curve, bending only at the base. Despite being an early creation, these swords often feature elaborate decorations, resulting in a visually striking appearance. Used in battle as well as for ceremonial purposes, this sword, as a forerunner of the tachi, became the everyday sword for courtiers by the 17th century during the Edo period. Let's now introduce one particularly famous tachi. O Kanihira is a tachi that is believed to have been crafted during the Heian period and is known as one of the greatest masterpieces among Japanese swords. The swordsmith Kanihira, who forged this sword, was a leading figure of his time. This sword is often referred to as a miraculous creation by Kanihira, a unique piece that he himself could not replicate. The reason lies in the balance of its shape and weight. The blade of this sword measures about 35.1 inches in length, which is quite long for a tachi. Normally, a sword of this length and size would weigh over 4.4 pounds. But O Kanihira weighs only about 2.98 pounds, making it exceptionally lightweight. This is due to its thinner construction compared to other swords of the same length, demonstrating the high level of craftsmanship involved. Furthermore, its center of gravity, including the curvature, is exquisitely balanced, making it easy to swing without feeling its weight. The beauty of its base iron and the pattern of the blade are also remarkable features of this sword. Attempts were made to replicate this sword in the early 20th century, but it proved impossible to recreate a sword of this size with both its strength and lightness. Despite being created during the nascent period of Japanese swords, it is an astonishing sword that is called the greatest of all time through to the present day. The known owner of this sword was Ikeda Terumasa, a warlord who served under Toyotomi Hideyoshi, the unifier of Japan. Known for his integrity, he valued his retainers above costly treasures, rarely coveting gold or silver. However, this sword was an exception. He reportedly paid a significant sum to acquire it, describing it as irreplaceable by an entire country. The Ikeda family traditionally displayed O Kanehira with armor every New Year, passing it down as a treasured family sword. Even when the emperor expressed a desire to see it, the Ikeda family is said to have responded that he would need to visit Okayama to view it, treating O Kanehira as an invaluable treasure not to be taken out of their domain. Designated a national treasure in 1951, the sword was purchased by the Ministry of Education in 1967 for 65 million yen from the Ikeda family. When adjusted for inflation, this amount equals about 270 million yen today, marking the highest price in the sale and purchase of Japanese swords until recent times. The Tokyo National Museum now owns it, occasionally displaying it to the public every few years. We hope you enjoyed this exploration into the world of Japanese swords. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more exciting content about the history of Japanese swords. Until next time, sayonara.